To move on to our next question. We got several Leo Carlsson related questions here. And the first one that we're going to go with comes from Brian. And Brian asks, given the events of the past week or so, are the Ducks even considering Leo Carlsson at number 2, or is that a rumor just being floated out there? That's a good question, Brian. I don't necessarily know that it's a rumor being floated out there. I just think that the teams that are at the top of the draft have to do their due diligence. And I think that that's still what even, the Ducks probably have a very good idea of who they're going to take. I still think that Adam Fantilli is the best overall fit for their team. But I think that you have to at least give Leo Carlsson some consideration at number 2, especially knowing that we're seeing him play at the center position at the World Championship right now. We're seeing what he's able to accomplish there. He's scoring. He's playing with good players. He's complementing good players there. That's an important thing. And so you can't discount that. That said, you look at the entire body of work over the entire season, and it's really hard to deny what Adam Fantilli has done for his team and for himself, having been so good at Michigan, winning the Hobey Baker, being a guy that has some grit, some tenacity, and some tremendous speed. I think the snarl in his game is going to really speak to the Ducks. And I do think that overall he makes the most sense for them. So I just think that, if you're hearing that the Ducks are considering Leo Carlsson, well, they should be, just because that's what you do. You don't count all of your chickens before they hatch, and you don't try to evaluate or make your pick well before you have to. And that's what I think that the Anaheim Ducks are going to do here with Leo Carlsson. So this is going to be we've got a couple more Carlsson questions. The next one is I'm going to move into, comes from Marcus, and this is specific to the two players that we just mentioned. And Marcus asks, does the fact that Leo Carlsson has outplayed Adam Fantilli in both the World Junior Championship and the World Championship, as well as being the 6th all-time in points per game for draft eligibles at the World Championship, push him to 2nd overall? It's a good question from Marcus, and I think it's one that, is, you have to consider it. But what I would say is that, when we do these evaluations of these players, and we don't necessarily evaluate them in one-to-one situations because of, Leo Carlsson was put in different positions on Team Sweden than Adam Fantilli was on Team Canada. And that largely has to do with, in both cases, Team Sweden lacking the same level of depth as Adam Fantilli. So we would expect, because Leo Carlsson is getting a bigger opportunity, we would expect him to produce. We would expect him to have a better tournament. I even said this before the tournament began. I said, don't be surprised if Leo Carlsson outproduces Adam Fantilli at this event. And I think Fantilli's World Juniors was a little eye-opening for sure. He ended up kind of getting moved around. I think he lost the faith of his coach early, and then he got it back and played his best 2 games, the most important 2 games of the tournament, the semifinal and the gold medal game. And, Leo Carlsson was excellent in that event as well. But if you take the whole body of work and you also look at the different needs and, the fact that Carlsson played mostly wing this year, we're seeing that he can absolutely play center. We're seeing the pace isn't an issue with him. We're seeing that, he has the intelligence, and there's certainly that's a mitigating factor in the decision process, saying, I think Leo Carlsson might have the better overall hockey sense. There's still, other factors at play, and we're not just judging these guys off of the events that they've had. And I know that can kind of be hard sometimes for, when you say, oh, well, one, you look at the two and you try to compare apples to apples. It's not necessarily that the way we can do that, especially with the fact that Fantilli is playing on a team that is largely comprised of NHL players, whereas Sweden has more SHL players than they do NHL players. That's kind of how Carlsson has had the opportunities that he's had. He's not playing in a similar situation. So that's how we have that kind of discussion. It's a very important point. But I still think that in the end, and especially on my list, no spoilers, but I am going to spoil it. The number 2 for me is pretty easy, and it's still Fantilli. All right. Our last Carlsson question comes from Posty, and this is comparing him to another player in the World Championship, and one that went in the draft last season. Posty asks, what separates Leo Carlsson from Cutter Gauthier in terms of NHL projection? Gauthier seems like a more enticing package to me, at least from a general standpoint, tools-wise. I think they're their overall projection is pretty similar. Like Carlson, Gauthier played wing most of his draft season. He was centered by Logan Cooley. Carlson played wing mostly at the SHL, but now we're seeing him play center. Gauthier, oddly enough, not playing center at the World Championship. He is taking some draws here and there, and he's playing the center position occasionally, but he's been more on the wing. I think that the question between the two is probably going to come down to, I think Gauthier has the overall better athletic package. He's a better skater. I think the hand skills might be a little bit better, and I think he's got a better shot. And so that's what I think separates him a little bit. I don't think that Carlson is heads above him as a player. I think they're probably similar in terms of overall value and projection. The thing that I think Carlson has an advantage on most players in this draft, and then also a number of prospects from outside of this draft, is how good his hockey sense is. He thinks and processes the game at an exceptionally high level. He plays a very mature style. I think Cutter Gauthier can be a little bit wilder at times. Same with Adam Fantilli, a little bit on the wild side in terms of, take the different approaches they take. But I think having that physicality, having that size, having the speed that Gauthier does, that's probably the separator in terms of, what the offensive capabilities are. So, I don't think that there's a huge gap between those two players. But I think it's an interesting kind of comparison to bring up, especially since we had kind of a similar discussion around Gauthier as we are with Carlson this season. So good question and much appreciated. We move on to another top tier prospect.